Hello viewers, welcome to the channel. Well, this is my very first VBA video, so I thought I'd start off by talking about different ways to reference your worksheet and which one of those I recommend. Now the first method is to use the Worksheets function with the sheet name hard-coded. I sometimes get business users asking me for help with a macro that they're working on, or even take over and build out the rest of the tool. And what I typically see is this kind of syntax where they select the source sheet, then the range to copy, then select the target sheet and the range to paste into. And this gets repeated over for different ranges. Now in my experience, this is quite common. And I believe a lot of it is to do with the fact that at some point, especially when we started off on our VBA adventure, we would have used the macro recorder. And while it is useful for learning, it doesn't generate optimized code. And you'll get things like this where it selects worksheets, it doesn't prefix ranges or cells. And by that I mean, it doesn't explicitly specify which sheet you want to copy from. And so in this case, it will use the active sheet, which you've selected above here. And this can pose a problem in itself, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Now, hard coding worksheet names is not a real big issue, especially if you've got something simple. But if you've got more complex code or lots of lines of code, different functions and subroutines, if someone changes the worksheet name, then you need to go and modify the name throughout your code or the macro will fail. And so this has happened to me a few times. I won't say it's common, but it has happened on a number of occasions where I've had a user contact me saying that a macro that they created or someone's created for them is no longer working, and it turns out that all they did was rename the worksheet. Easy fix, but I like to try and avoid that. And so another option is to define constants for each of your worksheets. So public const, and I like to call it ws_source, for example, as string equals and the sheet name, so sheet 1. And we can repeat this for the destination sheet 2. Just call it dest and sheet 2. And now in our code, we just use the constant instead of hard coding the name. And I'll just give you an example down here. WS source instead of sheet 1 and WS dest for sheet 2. And we do that throughout our code. If the sheet name ever changes, you just need to modify it in one spot up here. However, doing this worksheets either hard-coded or with a constant, you don't get the IntelliSense function. And I'll show you what I mean by that. When you normally hit press the dot, it should pop up a menu with different properties, parameters, methods that you can use. I'll give you an example. I'll get rid of the name here. And if we do a dot, you can see, I'll just zoom in. You can see that we've got different properties. We've got an add, so we can add a worksheet. And this is useful because we can say add a worksheet and it gives us the syntax in case we've forgotten it. The other benefit is it does help you learn because there may be some properties that you've never come across before, and you could research them and realize that, hang on, this might be useful for me at some point. So it's quite handy to have that feature. Move on to method 3, which is the one that I use the most and my recommended approach, and that is to use the code name. Now, if we look over to the left here, where we have our sheets, you'll notice that sheet 1 appears twice. So the one in the brackets is the actual sheet name that you see in Excel, and the one outside the brackets is the code name and they can be different. Now, instead of using Worksheets function, we can just use the code name. And if the user changes the sheet name from Excel itself, it won't affect the macro. We'll just copy the code here. And so instead of this Worksheets, we're going to say sheet 1. And the beauty with that is we get our IntelliSense. So now we'll change this one to sheet 2. And sheet 1 as well. I can just delete that. And sheet 2 as well. All right. So now I'm going to go and change the worksheet name. So let's call this one source. So sheet 1 is now source. Let's run the macro. So you can either do that by clicking on the play button up the top, or run and then run the sub or user form. Alternatively, just hit F5 and you'll see it's going to fail on the very first line. I'll just click the debug, and that's because this sheet no longer exists with that name anyway. So now we are in the debugger, and if you've never used this before, I highly recommend you learn how to use at least the basics of it. I will be putting together a video on that, so please look out for that. Otherwise, I'm sure there's many other tutorials out there, but it is very useful to identify issues and also just learn as you work more with VBA. Now, one thing you can do is, rather than delete all this code, because I want to go down to the code name, you can grab this cursor here, the little yellow arrow, and drag it down to where you want the code to start executing. So you can just drag it and move down, keep going down, let's say to here. I want it to skip that. So what I'm going to do is I can keep dragging it, and I want it to run from this point. So it's as though the code above that doesn't exist. Alternatively, you can click on a row, hold Control and press F9, and it moves to that row. But we want to start off here. So what you'll see now is if I run the code from this point on, this will work, whereas the code above where we hard-coded the sheet name didn't work. So I can continue to run from here by pressing F5 or that play button. So it's finished, no errors. And if I go to sheet 2, you can see I've copied these 2 columns. I'll just clear it for our next demonstration. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these range statements here are not qualified. It is relying on the fact that we did a select above here, and that can cause an issue, especially if you got something that runs for a few minutes, such as a loop. You got a lot of data. While it's running, if the user then clicks on a different worksheet, they might want to look at a different table while things are running in the background, then that worksheet becomes the active sheet, and so you're going to be copying range B1 to B11 in this case from that sheet instead of the intended one, which is sheet 1. And I can show you that. We'll use the debugger again. So we'll skip the first part here, which is going to fail because we changed the sheet name. So we'll start off, so this is our source, sheet 2 is blank. We're going to start off in sheet 3. So we run, we're going to skip past that code and come down to here, Control F9. So sheet 1, select. Let's go back to Excel, and you can see we're now on the source sheet, which is the correct one. Now the code runs and it copies the range. So I'll just go back and show you. You can see it's copied the correct range. Then it does a select. So it selects sheet 2, which is where it wants to put the data in. So it's copied the data from source. It wants to paste it into sheet 2. But now let's say that just before the paste, the user selects sheet 3. And you'll see what happens here. If I now run this bit, it's going to paste into sheet 3, as you can see here. Our data has gone into sheet 3 instead of sheet 2. So this can be a problem. Now I'll just run the rest just to finish it off. So it's best to qualify your ranges, your cells, columns or rows. You should always qualify it with the worksheet name. So let's just clear the data and I'll show you what I mean. So all you have to do is sheet1.range. So we just do that. And this is sheet 2 and sheet 1. Oh, my apologies. Sheet 2. All right, so what we're going to do now is just make sure everything is clear. Yep. All right, so now we will run this bit again. Let's skip all that, come down to the code name, the qualified one. We select sheet 1. So we are on sheet 1. We are going to copy sheet 2, sorry, sheet 1. You can see we copied the range. Now we're going to select sheet 2, as you can see. And now, before we paste, I'm going to change to sheet 3. And in this case, it should still paste it into sheet 2 because we've specified that in our statement. So sheet 2. So if you come back here, sheet 3 doesn't have the data. If I go to sheet 2, it's correctly pasted it into sheet 2. And the same can go with the rest of it. So we should have 2 columns now in sheet 2. And there's no data in sheet 3. Now let me clear it. I just want to extend this a little bit further. Now, because we're prefixing the range, we don't need to do this select anymore. And in fact, that's a good thing because if you have a loop or complex data where you're regularly switching between sheets, that can impact performance. So we don't really need this anymore. We can get rid of the select statements and it should still work. And the other beauty is that you can see we now only have 4 lines of code here versus the 8 that we had above to do the same thing. So again, I'm going to demonstrate this. So we're going to use sheet 3 and we're just going to sit on sheet 3. So the active sheet is sheet 3 and I can show you this in using the immediate window down the bottom. And if you don't have this, you click on view up the top and then immediate window or Control G and it'll open this window. And if I do a question mark, which is print, type in active sheet as one word, dot name and hit enter, you can see that our active sheet is 3. So we are going to run the code again, skip that part, come down to here. This is our code name with a qualified sheet being used. So we're currently on sheet 3. What we're going to do, sheet 1, copy. Come back over to Excel, you can see we're still on sheet 3. And just to show you, if I go to source, so sheet 1, you'll see that the range has been copied. You can see the ants around it. Let's go back to sheet 3. And just to show you again, active sheet name is still sheet 3. So now we're going to paste into sheet 2. And again, let's go over. We're still on sheet 3. I'll show you sheet 2. There we go. We've got the customer ID. Let's go back to sheet 3. Sheet 1, copy D1 to D11. Back to Excel. We're still on sheet 3. And if we go to source, we'll see that it's copied the range. You can see the ants around the required range. Let's go back to sheet 3 and we're going to paste into sheet 2. Okay, so here's sheet 3, and as you can see, it's still pasted it regardless of which sheet we were on. And we'll just remove the marching ants. So there you go. So this way we can create code that's more robust. It doesn't rely on the active sheet, which could be accidentally changed by the user while it's running. One more thing before I finish off here is I recommend changing the default code name for each sheet that's going to have any code. So if you come over to here, let's say we select sheet 1, and if you don't have this properties window down the bottom, you just do a view and properties window, and then you select the sheet that you want, and you can change the code name here. So I like to call it WS lowercase, let's say source. And we will also change, and you can see up here that it's changed it now. And the destination, sheet 2, we're going to change that to WS dest. Now I recommend you do that early on, otherwise you need to go and change the code. Unfortunately, it doesn't automatically do that. So in this case, I will go WS source, and I'll just copy this to sheet 1, and this is WS dest. Okay, and so this works exactly the same. We get our IntelliSense. It's the same thing, it's just a different name that's a bit more meaningful. Well, that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please hit the like button, and we'll see you on the next video.